So welcome to this special Rainbodhi event. My name's Bhante Akaliko. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a queer Buddhist monk and the founder of Rainbodhi LGBTQIA+ Buddhist community. So I'm really pleased to see you all here today and to acknowledge the country that I'm streaming to you from. This is something we do here in Australia, acknowledging our colonial history and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking. So I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Barramadigal people of the Darug Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And I extend that acknowledgement to any First Nations people anywhere. I'd also like to acknowledge our transcestors and our queeros, our queer elders, those people whose stories may have been forgotten, whose lives were probably much harder than ours, and who often fought for the privileges and the rights that we take for granted. So I'd like to acknowledge our queer elders and thank them for the work they've done to make our world a more inclusive and safe place for us. And I'd also like to just say a few words about Rainbodhi. So we're a community of LGBTQIA+ Buddhists. We welcome everyone, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, regardless of your Buddhist tradition or school, regardless of whether you have faith or no faith. And it's really good that you know that there's a place where you can come for spiritual teachings from queer, trans, intersex Buddhists, and that you can come along and listen to them in the company of people just like you. So today we have a very special talk by Venerable Thay Thong Phap. And Thay Thong Phap is a senior monk in the Vietnamese Mahayana tradition, and he is an expert in spiritual care. So it was because of his passion for chaplaincy and counselling that Thay did a lot of study and continues to study. I admire, Thay, I have to say, your commitment to lifelong learning. I know that you're doing yet another contemplative care course, and I really admire that. And Thay has worked for a long time as a university chaplain. He has worked in hospices and in palliative care, looking after the sick and the dying. And he also founded a contemplative care service in Tasmania. Now he's living in South Australia, and I'll introduce him and he'll tell you where he's calling from exactly, because I always forget. And I'd just like to thank you, Thay, for your time and your kindness in being with us today, and for your willingness to ask the big questions for this talk: who am I deepest down? So thank you so much, Thay. I really look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Bhante. My name, of course, is Thay Thong Phap. I'm a monk in a Vietnamese tradition, a Vietnamese Zen tradition. My teacher is the Most Venerable Thich Thanh Te, and he lives in Long Tan in Vietnam, which is where I was ordained Shramanera, a novice monk. I live now back in my own home state of South Australia. I live in the southern Flinders Ranges, which the Flinders Ranges are a very ancient range of mountains. They're older than the Himalayas, but they're much smaller because they've had a long time to erode. So I live in this really ancient landscape, and a very spiritual landscape too. And it's where a quarter of my family settled when they migrated to Australia at the beginning of the colony of South Australia in 1836. My grandfather's whole family come from this area. So in some sense, I've gone home to where my family settled. The people of this land are called the Ngajari people, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging them. I'd like to begin this talk by acknowledging these Ngajari people, the traditional owners of the unceded land on which I live. I pay my respects to Ngajari elders, past, present, and future. I unhesitatingly express my remorse and sorrow at the part my own forebears played in the dispossession of and harm caused to the Ngajari nation, and I rejoice at every step taken by the First Nations people of this beautiful land as they reclaim their languages, their cultures, and their rightful place in the nation state called Australia. Okay, so I'm going to start this talk with a poem I wrote in 1985. It was written during a period of study I undertook at Woodbrook Quaker College in Birmingham in England. It was written at a time when I was struggling with my religious identity. Who am I deepest down, yellow-robed and begging? Who am I deepest down, wizened elder, reddened earth? Who am I deepest down, mother, daughter, sister, friend? Who am I deepest down, oak leaf, stone circle? Who am I deepest down, full of quiet, void of silence? Who am I deepest down, smiling lips, Incan circle? Who am I deepest down, traveller, voyager going home? Who am I deepest down, lover, father, brother, friend? Who am I deepest down, little boy, leaping, dancing? Who am I deepest down, little child, hurting, weeping? Who am I deepest down? All of these and none at all. When I write a poem, usually only for personal consumption, it's like taking a journey without knowing where I will end up. And so my poem ends with the surprising and for me even shocking lines, who am I deepest down? All of these and none at all. Where did that come from, that thought? I'm not certain, and I don't even think that asking where it came from is the right question. It's what we call in Zen a koan. The koan I have been sitting with for the last 36 years, amongst other koans, involves the sense that the particularity of me, the historical me, lives in an interdependent relation with what is ultimately true about this phenomenon I call myself. The sublime and the ridiculous walk through life holding hands. All these identities I assume are who I am in the world of coming and going. But my true nature, my Buddha nature, transcends and yet includes all of my constructed identities. This is how I've come to understand the last line of my poem. My true nature, my Buddha nature, transcends and yet includes all of my constructed identities. Let me tell you a story which I trust will clarify the point I am making. There is in the city of Rochester, in the state of New York, a Buddhist practice center called the Rochester Zen Center, founded by a Zen teacher, Philip Kapleau Roshi. A student of Yasutani Roshi in Japan, he received transmission in his lineage, which is both a Soto and a Rinzai lineage. When he was studying with his teacher, he lived in a small flat outside of the practice center. At the same time, another American man was staying in the practice center. At night, when it was very cold, the man would start walking to the toilet, but regularly stop to pee in the Zen garden because it was too cold to go any further. Yasutani Roshi was told of this, and so he approached the man. I hear you are making water in the Zen garden. Yes, replied the man. Don't make water in the Zen garden. The man responded, but both the Zen garden and I are empty of a self. It makes no difference when emptiness meets emptiness. Whereupon Yasutani Roshi slapped the man across the face and said, don't make water in the Zen garden. How many of us would go into a cathedral in our city and pee on the altar? After all, isn't everything equally empty, equally without a solid, permanent and separate self? Emptiness may sound like a good reason to be an iconoclast. The answer is no. We wouldn't pee on the altar because in spite of the truth of emptiness and non-self, the cathedral remains a place in the historical realm, like the Zen garden, where we can pass through this swinging gate between the historical truth and the ultimate truth. We call such liminal places sacred, and wherever we are in the world, human beings can have a sense of when the historical reality meets the ultimate reality. This intuitive experience of the relationship between the realm of the mundane and the realm of the ultimate reality expressed in my poem is explained in Buddhism as the two truths, the relative or worldly truth, which is called samvriti satya in Sanskrit, and the absolute truth or paramartha satya. And they are obverse sides of the coin we call, in this instance, me. In short, this phenomenon you see before you is a male human being living in rural South Australia. His life has spanned 69 and a half years so far, and it is lived out in an effort to manifest the teachings of an ancient Indian spiritual master. He is conveniently designated as Thay Thong Phap, a Vietnamese name given to him by his teacher when he committed himself to living the monastic life. This is who he is at a relative level. He has not always been Thay Thong Phap, and one day, for whatever reason, he will not be Thay Thong Phap. There is nothing about him that is permanent. One day he will having become old and sick, die. He is, as a matter of fact, an agglomeration of constantly changing causes and conditions. And yet, he has the capacity to transcend all of the coming and going in his life, to enter a realm of no separate, permanent and solid self. He has the potential to realize the emptiness of separate self, the capacity to let go of the I, me, mine thought, and the capacity to realize his connectedness to every other empty phenomenon, material and mental, in which we call the universe, the Dharma realm. In 2005, when I was in my training monastery in Oklahoma City in the United States, and only a few days after my bhikkhu ordination, I went to the Western Monastic Conference, established for people regardless of their ethnic origin who had grown up in the West and had a Western education. Although my first teachers were two Theravadan monastics, Prakantipalo and Ayakema, an English monk and a German nun, this was my first opportunity to meet Western monastics who were my peers, and it was a real treat that was very affirming. I was picked up at the bus station by a monk who had brought delicious tofu sandwiches and fruit for our lunch. For some reason, our conversation turned towards being gay. I don't remember how, but I do remember assuming from the outset that my brother monk was also a gay man. At one point, he said to me that because there is no self, the identity gay is irrelevant. I remember at the time thinking that he was avoiding himself. I've subsequently come to see that we can use doctrines and even religious experiences as a means of avoiding very significant aspects of who we are, largely due to fear. This I would call spiritual bypassing. The term spiritual bypassing was first coined during the early 1980s by a transpersonal psychotherapist named John Welwood in his book, Toward a Psychology of Awakening. According to Welwood, spiritual bypassing can be defined as a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. So if the ultimate truth is all that is worth bothering about, If the historical reality is merely ephemeral and we don't have to attend to it, why would the Buddha teach the need for ethical precepts to guide our lives together? The 4 divine abidings, or the 4 measureless minds, same thing, are aspirations for us as well as outcomes of abiding in emptiness. They are, if nothing else, social virtues. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity are not objects. They are intentional actions cultivated in the heart-mind and directed towards ourselves and all other sentient beings, including our watery and miraculous mother, the earth. They are this-worldly virtuous mental states that come from residing in our true nature, referred to by Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu as voidness or emptiness. If all that is significant is the ultimate reality, the historical realm of non-self and this mundane or saha world matter not. Then we have no responsibility to the peoples of Afghanistan, including the LGBTQIA+ community there. We have no responsibility to all the people of Myanmar, including the Rohingyas. We have no responsibility to the different peoples of China, such as the Uyghurs and the people of Hong Kong. We have no responsibility to the Tibetans. We have no responsibility to the First Nations people of this beautiful island continent who have suffered the racism of British colonialism and post-colonial Australia. We have no responsibility to the rest of the earth's precious human children, not to mention our more than human cousins, the animals, whom we have enslaved and abused over millennia. We have no responsibility to the forests, rivers, oceans, and air we are poisoning. If all we have to account for is non-self, we needn't consider anything at all in the historical or relative world. It doesn't take us much to realise that to hold to that position is contrary to the best in us. I'd like now to reflect on 2 of the identities I claim and the ways in which the historical aspect of the identity is interdependent with the ultimate truth of who I am. But before I do that, I want to say to you that I've suddenly realized that I was going to start with meditation and haven't. I've gone straight into the Dharma talk. So I apologize for that. And at the end, we'll have some time to be quiet and to reflect. And the other thing I've forgotten was a glass of water. So I'm getting a little parched, if you'll bear with me, and I have to lick my lips often. So the identities that I want to focus on are my ethnicity and my gender and sexual identity. I grew up in a little suburb near Port Adelaide called Pennington during the 1950s and 1960s. During this post-war period, many people came to Australia as refugees from Europe. My friends in school consisted almost entirely of kids from Ukrainian, Polish, Russian, Yugoslav, Latvian, Lithuanian, German, Dutch, Italian, and Greek families, as well as those from Britain. Compared with my rather tame Anglo-Port Adelaide environment, they were exotic and interesting. As well as this, I came from a dock city, Port Adelaide, where boats from all over South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia berthed. The crews were Asian and they fascinated me. As my dad worked on the wharves, he would bring me home coins for my coin collection, square coins from the then Ceylon, squiggly edge coins from India, banknotes from China and Japan. I would hold the coins from India, I would hold the coins in my hand and try to feel my way to those countries. I even used to smell them to see if I could smell the country that they came from. In high school, I learned Latin and French and took enormous pleasure each week in adding new words to my growing French vocabulary. I loved learning languages and so asked my friend Theodore Budas to teach me his language, Ukrainian. Over the May holidays of 1965, I taught myself to read the Cyrillic alphabet. The first word I could read was Marika, which is a girl's name. Eventually, I went to the Ukrainian ethnic Sunday school for a year, and now, 55 years later, I still speak Ukrainian with an accent from the west of the Ukraine. I just feel like that's a little crazy, and my dad used to ask me, why don't you learn a sensible language like German? But I just was fascinated by Slavic languages. This experience whetted my appetite to know more about my own heritage. The first person I remember in this life, and whom I remember vividly almost 70 years later, is my great-grandmother, Gran Cooper. She was born in Adelaide in the city above a tailor shop in Hindley Street on January 26th, 1869. So she was a 26er. Her father was Edward Deere, a Welsh tailor from the town of Llanilltidfawr in Morgannwg in Glamorganshire. Gran Cooper's mother was Elizabeth Richards, born in the Cornish town of Helston in 1830. My great-grandmother was a Celt. Subsequently, I discovered that over half of my forebears were Welsh, Cornish, and Irish. At age 15, on the day of my maternal grandmother's funeral, my Auntie Nancy taught me to count from 1 to 10 in Welsh, which she had learned from my great-grandmother. Subsequently, I learned to count from 1 to 10 in Irish and Cornish. The first two I learned from another person, not a book. I could and can count in my ancestral languages as the result of an oral transmission. Of course, I could speak English as my mother tongue, and I learned French at school, the language of Phoebe Garneau, my great-great-grandmother. I loved all the languages of my ancestors, and I have visited the places in Ireland, Wales, Cornwall, England, and France where my family come from, the places where I am indigenous to. The claiming of these ethnic identities, belonging in the relative reality, gave me a sense of who I was, a sense of belonging to a people, and to find a place in the long history of the human species, at a difficult time in my life when I was also realizing that I was homosexual, a word that set me apart from others, that sounded dirty and dangerous. The claiming of my ethnic identities gave me something that would help me survive the years ahead, in which I gradually moved toward claiming my sexual and gender identity. I also learned that the Celts were sorely oppressed over the centuries by what I call the Anglo-Norman Conspiracy. This helped me to identify, to the degree that I am able, with the First Nations people of this country, whose land was stolen, who were murdered and defiled in the many massacres of First Nations people in Australia, including here in my own home state. I quickly became aware of the oppression endemic in racism. I discovered that the languages and cultures of Indigenous peoples were denied them. Without claiming the history and the beauty of my own forebears, including their beautiful languages devalued by the colonising power in London, I may not have come to desire being an ally to Aboriginal people. Over these many years, I've put a lot of time and energy into reclaiming my ethnic identity, a journey which has been immensely rich and has enabled me, as I have said, to seek to be an ally to Aboriginal people. Throughout this journey, I have also been confronted with the unwholesome patterns inherent in my ancestral and cultural roots. This has included confronting the part Celtic peoples played in the oppression of First Nations people here and also in Zimbabwe, where I lived for 2 years. I've also realised the need to lay aside the rigidities associated with claiming an identity. Please allow me to express this in the form of a gastronomic metaphor. I love to sit quietly in a local bakery here in Crystal Brook and eat a Cornish pasty for lunch. But I also love Vietnamese cold rolls and cappuccino and Greek biscuits and Zimbabwean stadza with relish and varenika from the Ukraine. I'm not bound to my ethnic origins, but can be sustained by the beauty of other cultures. I can throw out the rigidity that often adheres to an ethnic identity. In the end, I can respect and appreciate all of these forms of being human, and I am ultimately none of them at all. Gender and sexual orientation. I've never really been in doubt about my gender. I've always known myself to be male, which has included for me a strong sense of fatherliness, particularly towards my brother, who is 7.5 years younger than me. The only time I considered the possibility of gender realignment was at about the age of 13, when I couldn't work out how I, as a male, could accommodate my feelings towards other males and my yearnings for love, both sexual and emotional, from and toward them. I discovered my sexual orientation when I was about 4. It was based in some kind of attraction towards my own father, whom I had initially wanted to emulate, or at the very least, wanted his approval. When I inadvertently revealed this attraction to my parents, their reaction made it very clear to me that this was something I must never mention again, and indeed I must hide. And so, as for most of the rest of us, I worked hard at maintaining a secret over the ensuing 17 years, until I finally came out and became deeply involved in gay liberation and the anti-sexist movement in Adelaide in 1973, which is now a very long time ago. The necessity to protect myself by keeping my big secret arose out of a sense of the precious nature of my life, the value I placed on my own particular experience as a human being. This also came to the fore when at the age of 20, I had to sign up for national service and go to fight in the war in Vietnam. I had from childhood an abhorrence of violence and war and was unwilling to participate in the killing of children and old people in a country I knew nothing about. Some years later, I realised that my conscientious objection was also based on my unwillingness to be harmed or to lose my life in what was a war between imperial powers known as the Cold War, where Vietnam was used as a theatre in which this ideological battle was waged. Without my experience as a young gay man, I would never have understood the significance of what Buddhism refers to as a precious human rebirth. With regard to my gender, I knew myself to be male, but the struggle for me was concerned with what kind of male was I. This took a long time to resolve. What presented itself as male, both in terms of my experience of my father and in terms of what a man was within the stereotypes of Australian culture, was not who I was. Not only did this lead me into a long period of rejecting the idea of being male, I referred to myself in the mid-70s as an effeminist. It made it very difficult to form basic relationships with other men. Friendships with females had always been much easier for me, and I formed very deep and often enduring relationships with females. Over the years, and in spite of unsuccessful efforts at developing partnerships with 3 different men, I have been gradually able to form friendships with other men. This is an ongoing hope in the monastic life as well, to create deep, open-hearted and brotherly relationships with other monks. Friendships in the good, we call them, or Kalyana Mitra. In terms of my ethnicity, my sexuality and my gender identity, those phenomena that reside within the relative dimension, I have begun to embrace qualities that reside in the ultimate reality, such as loving kindness, compassion, open-heartedness, a generous interest in others, a willingness to grow patiently into relationship, and other qualities that belong to the experience of the awakening heart and mind. And by practicing the Buddha Dhamma, we are led to abide in the experience of emptiness, which in turn feeds back into our experience as beings finding their place in the relative world. The Heart Sutra, from the great wisdom literature in Mahayana Buddhism, says form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than form. The same is true with feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These constituents of what make up a human being are to be found in the ultimate reality and the historical reality simultaneously. It is a grave and hurtful error to oneself and others to deny either reality simply due to fear and ignorance. If the LGBTQIA plus identities aren't real and don't deserve our love and awareness, why would Rainbodhi exist? Why would all of us, and especially Bhante Akaliko, put so much effort into making the Buddhist community, including the monastic Sangha, more inclusive, completely open-hearted, and a place of healing from the suffering of oppression and fear? If being a person who identifies as LGBTQIA+ consists only in emptiness, does that mean our oppression and subsequent suffering are not significant? Of course, the historical and the ultimate reality inter-are, as the Plum Village tradition puts it. Samsara and nirvana are not realities other than each other. They are the same experience, seen from different perspectives. Everything is shot through with the light of the Buddha mind. Our task is threefold in relation to every identity we claim, and in this context, particularly with respect to how we identify on the LGBTQIA+ spectrum. Firstly, it is important to claim our identity for ourselves and others. We need at the very least to acknowledge our identity in this relative realm. Otherwise, we will live perpetually in a painful state of denial. Secondly, we need to clean up our identities. That is to say, we need to acknowledge the internalized oppression we experience and to heal it. For this, we will need loving and trusted friends, some form of Sangha who will listen lovingly and without judgment to our stories for as long as it takes. We may well need to discharge the painful emotions around the internalized oppression that besets us. One man I know referred to this internalized oppression as just a bit of shit on your boot, and your task is to wipe it off. Thirdly, we then need to hold our identities lightly with our hands open. We are much more than our sexual orientation and gender, our ethnicity, our social class, our level of ability, and so on. We are in our true nature, luminous, wise and loving beings of the same nature as a Buddha. And that may not appear evident in the world at the moment, but it's the thing I hold on to really, really strongly, in the hope that, that we can do our best to be decent human beings. We will need to engage in 3 tasks throughout our lifetimes. We will need to engage in the task of claiming our identity, cleaning it up, and letting go of our relative identities as a place of practice. And the last thing I want to say is this, that when people come along and say, well-meaning Buddhists come along and say, oh, well, you don't need to worry about that because after all, you have no self or you're empty. Our task is to see that as their fear and to explain to them the fact that this me who I am in all my complexity and the ultimate truth of who I am are not separate. They are interdependent. And you don't have to listen to that stuff. That's just the talk of people who are afraid. That's all I have to say about that. I don't know where I'm up to in terms of time. Maybe, I don't know, Bunsen, you tell me.
Oh, Thay, I'm so pleased that you could share this talk with us today. And I really thank you for bringing an incredible personal perspective, which I really admired you doing, because I know that opens you up to a very vulnerable place. And I really appreciate you having that willingness to share with us and then to bring some wisdom in for us about how we can use our understanding of Buddhism and link it to our gender and sexual identities, which is something that is often rejected by mainstream Buddhist communities and is a source of pain and confusion and grows ignorance, you know. And so I really do appreciate you bringing those 2 things together. I think that we'll probably have some questions from some of our listeners, and I'd love to welcome those at this stage. and to invite people to ask some questions now after hearing the talk. So you can either put them in the chat, or if you'd like to, you can put your hand up and we might unmute you. I have a question to start, which is, so you suggested that this problem of being told that yourself doesn't exist, that that it's all meaningless, that you are ultimately nothing. I often refer to this as a kind of like a weaponized not self, where people kind of use a teaching which is a tool for liberation to harm others. But how is that happening inside us? Like, how can we balance that need to accept ourselves and the need to understand an ultimate reality? How can we? Do you see sometimes that people harm themselves through this practice? I mean, I see it, so I'm interested in hearing your perspective.
That's a good question, and it's something I've not thought about. I can only speak for myself. My difficulty when I first came to Buddhism in 1978 was not so much that non-self might, the idea of no permanent abiding self existing from its own side, that was not a problem for me in terms of my own identities that I claimed. It was much more, well, I suppose it was in a way. If I think about it, one of the most wonderful Buddhist teachers that I know of is a Theravadan monk who's now passed away, called Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu in Thailand. And he taught something which resonated with me because of another identity I have that I haven't talked about, which is my left-wing political views. But he talked about Dharmic socialism, which really attracted me right from the word go. And his book, Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree, is not an easy read. It's a collection of Dharma talks, really, but it's a wonderful explication of emptiness or voidness from his point of view. And he was a monk who moved a long way from Bangkok because the people in the monastics in Bangkok didn't like him very much. And they accused him of being a communist on the one hand or a Mahayanist on the other. And the worst thing to be was a Mahayanist. Rather. Anyway, he teaches, his teaching about emptiness and non-self is much more about letting go of the thought of this solid I, me, mine thought that is our basic addiction, really. We're basically addicted to thinking that here there is this person who has to be kind of sustained in the world and aggrandized. That's the basic problem. And for me, that's never really touched. I've never felt from him that it was weaponized against me as a gay man, for example. So it's not a problem I've ever had. All I can think of from my own kind of bolshy tendencies, really, is just when people do use it, is to disagree with them and say they're wrong. And actually, like Jesus said, you might just have to shake the dust off your sandals and walk away. Such people are not helpful to you. They're not practitioners of loving kindness and compassion, which are basic to every, they're basic human qualities. So such people don't deserve our time, I don't think. And what we do about it within ourselves, when we are hurt by it in ourselves, I think the only thing we can do is to go to trusted friends. And if it's so hurtful and we might need to weep and wail and scream and carry on, I think that's perfectly valid. We need the company of others who are walking the same kind of path in life. That's really all I can think of to say. But I don't think it's there in the teachings of the Buddha, and certainly not in the teachings of Buddhadasa Bhikkhu.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding us the importance of being with like-minded people who understand, people who get us, who we don't have to feel any shame or judgment. Being with is so important to just affirm those various aspects of ourselves, which is why I started Rainbodhi, but also to add to what you said as a possible strategy, maybe we can also point out that other people who are not queer or trans, that other people also have an identity, you know, that they have a sexuality, they have a gender, and often because of their privilege, cis privilege, straight privilege, they can't see that they have that identity. And I remember when I was ordained, people were saying that, you know, I was no longer gay. And I was like, what? You know, like, how can you think like that? Like, if there wasn't any sexuality, you know, then we wouldn't have these rules for the monks about, you know, being alone with women, for example, or that, you know, there's these rules around touching bodies and things like that. So it's so easy to forget, and just makes me remember how othered we are, and how we kind of queers are often singled out as having this problem or that problem or this attachment to identity or whatever, but people can't even see that they have their own when they're cis or straight, which is a barrier for them, because it's good to see what you've got, you know, to know about your identities so that you can, as you say, hold them lightly. But people who can't even see their identities, you know, they have much more difficulty letting it go. There's a few questions.
Yes, okay.
Sorry, you want to go?
I was just going to say, that's the three parts of the process of claiming the identity, cleaning up the identity, and holding it lightly have to happen simultaneously, and they have to happen over the whole of our lifetimes. Because, you know, you know, I forgot the meditation because I was about to present something that made me very vulnerable, and I forgot to bring in a glass of water. So that I'm, you know, I've got something to drink. We are vulnerable. We are able to be hurt very easily, and we have to look after ourselves. And I think one of the things that Western Buddhists are not necessarily very good at is taking refuge in the Sangha. We live in a world that is postmodern and highly individualistic, and I can do this all by myself, and I don't need to belong to a Sangha. I can listen to all the Dharma talks online. Well, that's not really what, you know, Buddhism consists of both Buddha, of all those three things, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And we have to build those communities of resistance and resilience if we are to flourish, I think. And that's the wonderful thing about Rainbodhi and many other examples of that all around the world, the building of sanghas, whether they're Buddhist or not.
There's a comment here, and then maybe we'll, I was wondering, maybe it could be a good time to connect with the community and come back afterwards for a meditation. What do you think about that if we have breakout rooms? I'll just read this question from Khalil, who says, some people indulge in self-destructive and self-sabotaging behaviours, which are very unhealthy patterns of behaviour. These are deeply hurt people. As the saying goes, hurt people hurt people. Do you have anything to respond to that? About self-sabotaging behaviours and how people act out based on their own hurts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things. First of all, sometimes those people will act out and be really hurtful towards you or me or whomever. And in those instances where we know that those people are really hurtful or really hurt, and anybody who hurts anybody else is hurt themselves, we have, first of all, not to take it personally. It's not meant personally. It's just a really hurt person who is trying to find a way to give expression to their hurt. And so we have, I think it behoves us to really respond compassionately and warmly, but wisely. We can't just sit there and take rubbish from people, especially if it's dangerous rubbish. We have to understand them. We have to have a sense of warmth towards them, but we also have to act wisely. And that might mean, I don't know, it might mean helping them seek professional help for this really deeply entrenched pain that they're experiencing. You know, I'm what the Dalai Lama is. I'm a simple Buddhist monk. I don't have the skills to help a lot of people who are really hurt. But there are others who do have those skills, other people who've committed their lives to the care of others. And I think that's what we have to do. But we must never lose our sense of, or our journey towards understanding and compassion. We mustn't lose that in the face of those kind of challenges and write people off. That's not the way of the Buddha, I think. Not the Buddha either.
And there's a question here from Francis. Francis says, "Hello, Thay. Thank you for sharing and good to see you again. I'm just wondering if you could share about if and how COVID may have affected sense of identity and what this offers others in these times."
Now that must be Francis Foon, whom I met in Hobart at an SCA conference. How are you, Francis? I hope you're well. COVID-19, gosh, COVID-19's kind of gets the blame for everything, really, doesn't it? But as you said, Bunty, it also means that it draws people from all over the world together on Zoom and creates a big community. I think the thing that's probably truest about COVID-19 is that for so many people, it's created a great sense of isolation and from one another. And that means there's not the opportunity to share what's on our hearts as readily with others. But I'm not sure that inability to share is simply the result of COVID-19. I think in our culture anyway, being vulnerable with one another, being open with one another isn't always valued. We have that sense of I, me, mine very strongly in Western capitalist culture, and we feel the need to protect ourselves against those others outside of ourselves. So yes, I think that COVID-19 has created additional isolation, but I think it's there already, and it needs to be addressed anyway, regardless of COVID-19. Now, Bunty, have I answered that question at all? Please tell me, please be honest.
I think you're probably parched and need to get that glass of water.
Well, no, yes. That's okay. I'll manage that. But tell me, did I answer the question?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, well, maybe I think sometimes with the answers to questions, you may not get the answer you wanted, but you might get the answer you need. I don't know.
All right. But tell me the question once more, then I can go away with
sure. It. So I'm just going to find it in the chat again.
Sorry.
Could you share about how COVID may have affected sense of identity and what this offers us in these times?
Oh, okay. Oh, I don't think I know the answer to that, Francis. How has it affected?
Maybe that's something that we can pick up in the breakout room.
I mean, for myself, being alone is like a great pleasure. And it's helped me develop my sense of what all of this aloneness means for me as a Buddhist monk. But for those of us who are not Buddhist monks or nuns, and those of us who are not introverts, and those or who are whatever, it must mean something very different, and I don't know what that is. No, I don't know what it is, but I suspect what the isolation that's come out of COVID-19 may have enabled us to feel is the great value of the company of other people. That we may value others much more than we did before, and that we may look forward to that time when we can, without any worry at all, embrace one another, put our arms around each other, hold hands, do all the things that are normal in relationships. That's all I can think of. I hope that's helpful.
Very true. I think there's probably lots of people even missing that very annoying person at the office. You know? There's a few more questions, so we'll go through them quickly. We have a question from Anusha, who says she missed the title of the book you mentioned, which I think maybe was Bhante Buddhadasa's book, perhaps?
Oh, does that? I'll go and get it. Hang on a minute. It's called The Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree. And it's a great book. I think I've read it about 4 times. And every time I underline something else, practically the entire book is underlined now. But and my little sangha that I'm the resident monk for, we're reading it through this year, and it's taking us the whole year to read, even though it's not complex or even though it's really beautifully written in English and not very big. The ideas are really profound, and they yeah, it's a great book. Yes.
And she also asks, Thay, interesting question, and I might combine the subsequent question as well from Jamie, because it's both about identity and politics and claiming identities and not taking things personally. So Anusha asks about claiming identity. Does it depend on how our identity impacts our actions and karma, knowing our identity and using it as a tool to help others, to encourage sensitivity and empathy in others? For example, knowing that we're at peace with our identity may help others who are struggling in non-accepting environments, maybe LGBTQ Buddhists who are refugees, or maybe other LGBTs from minority backgrounds. So it's more of a, I guess, more of a statement. But Jamie asks in particular, would you be willing to talk a bit more about engaging with politics as a queer person and someone who strives to be an ally for people of colour and trans people? It's hard not to take politics personally. This is something I struggle with too. If I'm totally honest, sometimes I feel challenged to act with compassion when there are many politicians who seek to harm these communities.
I think in the first part, Jamie answered the question for herself. It was, like you said, it was more of a statement than a question, and I think that there's nothing about that she said that I couldn't agree with. With regard to politics and politicians, one of the identities I didn't talk about, but is equally significant to me as any other identity I claim, and that is that I come from a very working class family, and on both sides of my family, they were involved in the development of the labour movement in Port Adelaide and South Australia generally. And my grandfather was actually a communist. He was a member of the Communist Party of Australia. And he influenced me enormously when I was a kid. He'd get his China magazines and his Soviet Union magazines, and I would get them after he'd finished reading them. So I grew up both a religious kind of person, but also a person of very left-wing point of view. And I find I struggle all the time with the awful things that conservative politicians and their counterparts do in this country and all around the world. And I get angry and all those things that Buddhist monks are not supposed to be, But I don't care, because I think there are some things that are just plain wrong, in my mind. And I just, Adelaide, where I come from, the class system here is vicious. It's really vicious. It looks like a nice little peaceful place, but you don't want to come from the wrong side of the tracks. So I don't know. I get really vehement about some things, especially around political things, and especially what's going on in Australia, all the corruption amongst politicians and the treatment of refugees, the refusal to engage with Makarata, with a treaty, all those things. There's so much wrong around me. I don't feel in the least bit, what's the word? Apologetic for my stance and even for the feelings that I feel. And if that means that I come back as some sort of worm, well, so be it. I don't particularly believe in rebirth in that way, but I think you have to be true to your own understanding of the way the world could be ideally. You have to be true to your own understanding that at our very basis, we are decent, loving, compassionate, joyful, open-hearted, serene beings. That's our inheritance as human beings, just as it was for the Buddha. We have to accept that that's what we're really like, not all this rubbish that's foisted on us by people who are addicted to the I, me, mine thought. And we're all addicted to it. We all have to work hard to let go of that addiction. Now, again, I have to ask you, Bhante, have I answered the question? I don't know,
I'll say yes. I think you answered well. And it's worth remembering, of course, that the Buddha always said that we should praise what is praiseworthy and condemn what is not praiseworthy. So if someone's harming another person or dividing and hurting other people, then we should speak out about it.
And in a monastic, sorry. In a monastic sangha, you've got rules that govern that. In a monastic sangha, you don't put up with people who are being divisive and wrong. You kick them out for the rest of this lifetime if they break those pavajika offences. So why would we be mealy mouthed about what happens in the world and to all the living beings in the world on the basis of greed, hatred, and ignorance? I don't think we should be apologetic. We should stand up.
It's quite unusual to hear such a strong perspective, and I appreciate your honesty, I have to say. I think it's something that probably falls into that category of spiritual bypassing, where we believe that Buddhists must be very soft, very passive, just accept everything that happens, never complain, allow yourself to be treated like a doormat, and all those sorts of things, which are not the way the Buddha taught, especially in the early suttas.
No, I think the worst word in the world is nice.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking, I see that our Zoom master Ben has just walked off, and I was about to ask us to go to breakout rooms. And look, he's coming back. Thanks, Ben. So we have this opportunity together as friends to go into a smaller room to have a chat and to talk about some of the things that Thay has raised. And so I invite you to participate in these sessions. I know some people are a little bit kind of uncomfortable when it comes to meeting new people online. But I encourage you just to connect with each other, even if it's just to listen, or even just to be a silent presence, even if you don't want to show your video, just to be there and to hear what others have to say as well, because we all need to be heard. And so Thay has asked a question for us to consider, which is to choose one of the ways you identify in the world that matters deeply to you. It doesn't have to be gender or sexual identity. What have you experienced from within this identity that has enabled you to grow spiritually? So what aspects of your identities have helped you grow as a spiritual person? And so we're going to have breakout sessions for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and we'll have a chat about these things. We'll come back and Thay will lead us in a meditation to finish up. So Thay, you should run and grab a glass of water now while you can as we go to these breakout sessions. Thanks. So welcome back to the main room, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to share in those sessions. The group that I was in, I heard some really interesting perspectives and learnt some new things, and also was able to reconfirm parts of my own belief system about how our various identities can actually end up being like a superpower on the spiritual path. So I'd like to invite Thay to lead us in maybe just 10 minutes of meditation, and So let's invite Thay to do that.
Okay. Let me just put 10 minutes on my timer. So I'd invite everybody to sit comfortably wherever they are, in a chair or on the floor or in a cushion. Wherever you are, sit comfortably in a way that you would normally sit when you're meditating. But be sure that your back is upright, not ramrod upright, but just comfortably upright, and your shoulders are relaxed. And you can, whatever you would normally do with your hands, whether you put one on each thigh or rest one hand on top of the other, do that. You may sit with your eyes closed normally, or with them partially open. So you do whatever is most comfortable for you. Just take 3 breaths, very deep breaths, inviting life into your body and breathing out. As best you can, keep your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath, wherever you most readily experience that. And it may be at the nostrils. It may be with the rising and the falling of the chest. It may be with the expansion and contraction of the abdomen. Just breathing in, breathing out, and keeping your attention as best you can on the in-breath and the out-breath. I invite you to, on the out-breath, bring a sense to the out-breath of gratitude and love and warmth. You breathe in and you breathe out, and as you breathe out, bring to that out-breath that sense of love and gratitude and warmth. Because breathing out is the last thing you will do in this life. So let us practice for the last moments of our lives now, bringing lots of love, lots of open-heartedness, lots of warmth, to the very last act of breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in calmly, with ease. Breathing out with love and gratitude and warmth. On the out-breath, you might also like to allow for a very gentle smile to appear on your face, like the smile you see on a Buddha image. Allow for that to relax your facial muscles. And allow the warmth and the love arise in you. Breathing in, breathing out, letting go peacefully, lovingly. Allow that out-breath, that final moment of our lives, to be surrounded with gratitude, with love, with warmth, breathing in and breathing out. Go forth on your journey for the benefit of the many, for the joy of the many, out of compassion for the welfare, the benefit and joy of all beings. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Thay. That's a beautiful way to end a very powerful session. And I'd like to thank you again for your time and for being so open about all those various selves and for allowing us to glimpse an insight into yourself and your practice. And so thank you so much for being here today.